I do not read general fiction books very often, but when I do, they sometimes end up becoming my favourite books of all time. So let's talk about some general fiction books that I have read and absolutely adored. The first one is The Roots Run Deep by Chris Strong. This is actually from an indie author, which makes me love it even more. This one is literally just over 200 pages, so I sat there and binged this whole thing in one sitting. It was so perfect. It is about a group of childhood friends who reunite to try to save one of their friends who is not really in a good mental state. Definitely look up trigger warnings for this one, but I loved it. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zufla Kato. I feel like I always say this author's name wrong, but hopefully I'm not. This one is following the Syrian Revolution, which is not something I've ever read before, and it's also not something I'm very knowledgeable on. This one is following Salama, who is a nurse during this war that's going on, and technically she's not actually a nurse, she's a pharmacist, but because there are so many people getting severely injured, she has to kind of step up and become like a nurse for them. And her best friend Layla, who is married to her brother, is urging her to leave Syria. She wants them both to leave and find a new life and start somewhere fresh. But Salama just feels like she needs to stay in this place and she needs to help people. This book was so heartbreaking, but it was also just such a beautiful story. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. I read this probably like 3 years ago now and absolutely loved it. I still have very fond memories of the first time I read this book. It's following Aristotle and Dante, obviously, and they are best friends, but they're also realizing that they have a lot of stronger feelings for each other. This book is basically just them trying to figure out themselves and who they are, and again, this is such a beautiful story. Next one is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is by far one of my favorite books of all time now, and I really didn't go into it expecting that. This was a 6-star read for me. It was so perfect. I also heavily annotated this if it wants to focus. This is following two sisters during World War II who are doing completely different things in this book. So we've got their two different point of views. They are only together for a little part of this book, so it feels like you're reading two completely different stories, but then it comes together at the end in such an emotional way. I was sobbing by the end of this book, but again, it was so perfect, and everyone that I've recommended this to since has also loved it. And the last one I have is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I feel like I talk about this book so much. This was another 6-star read for me. I went into this expecting a romance, but it's not like that at all, so do not expect that. This is following two best friends who have a falling out when they're a lot younger, but then they meet again in a train station. I think it was 10 years later, and they decide to take this massive leap of faith and design and create a video game together because they both love video games. And that's kind of the common interest that they had growing up together. If you don't love video games, that is totally fine. I don't either, and I still adored this book, so highly, highly recommend.